Hey everyone, and welcome. Are you ready to seriously boost your English skills using podcasts?
I am.
All right, cool. Well, in this deep dive, we're going to explore just that.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's exciting stuff. We've got some tips and tricks taken from an actual English learning podcast. So,
Cool.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's going to be good. And this isn't just about listening to any podcast, okay? This is
Mhm.
about using them strategically to become more fluent. It's about getting the most out of every minute you spend listening. What do you think about that?
Well, I think podcasts are amazing because they offer this really unique blend of convenience and authentic language. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
It's not just about being able to learn on the go, although that's definitely a plus.
For sure.
It's more about immersing yourself in the
Yeah.
way English is really spoken.
hmm
Like with all the idioms and slang and natural flow that you just don't get from textbooks.
I love that point about authenticity. I mean, think about it. You're not going to learn the latest slang from a textbook that was published 5 years ago, let alone 100 years ago. Podcasts, though, give you a direct line to how people are actually speaking right now, with all the little quirks and nuances that make language come alive.
Exactly. And it's not just about slang either. You're exposed to different accents, regional variations, all those subtle things that textbooks just don't capture.
It's like having a front row seat to real world conversations, which is amazing. So, in our source material, they emphasize this idea of active listening. It's not enough to just passively listen. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I completely agree. Active listening is key. When you listen actively, you're not just letting the sounds wash over you. You're engaging with the language, trying to understand the meaning, picking up on new words, and maybe even predicting what the speaker's going to say next.
I love how you put that. And the source has this fantastic tip for making active listening even more powerful.
What's that?
Use transcripts. It's amazing how much easier it becomes to grasp new vocabulary and grammar when you can see and hear the language at the same time.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
A lot of people underestimate how powerful it can be to combine those two things,
Yeah.
visual input and auditory input.
Right.
It's like having subtitles for real life.
Exactly. Okay, so we've got this foundation of active listening and using transcripts. Now for the fun part,
Okay.
podcast recommendations.
Yes. Let's hear it.
All right, you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, so for beginners, they recommend ESL Pod.
Oh, yeah. ESL Pod is a classic.
It is, right, and it's a classic for a reason. They use clear, slow-paced English, and they provide really helpful vocabulary explanations. Another good option is Learn English with BBC.
Oh, the BBC?
Yeah, they have these short, digestible lessons that won't overwhelm you. What do you think about those choices?
I think both of those are great starting points, especially for beginners. They offer that kind of structured, supportive environment that can be so valuable when you're just starting out.
I totally agree. Okay, now for those at an intermediate level, what do you think about The English We Speak from the BBC?
Oh, the English we speak is fantastic. It focuses on those tricky idioms and everyday expressions that can really trip you up.
It's so helpful. They also recommend 6 Minute English, also from the BBC. Short, sweet, and to the point, right?
Yeah, 6-minute English is perfect for squeezing in a quick lesson during your day.
Exactly. Now, for our advanced learners, what do you think about TED Talks Daily?
TED Talks Daily.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a must. You get inspiring talks on so many different subjects, which is perfect for expanding your vocabulary and being exposed to different speaking styles.
And it's a great way to stay informed about what's happening in the world, too.
Absolutely.
They also recommend Stuff You Should Know.
Oh, stuff you should know. That's one of my favorites.
I love it, too. It's like a rabbit hole of knowledge.
Right. You start listening to one episode
Yeah.
and you end up spending hours just going down this rabbit hole of fascinating information. And it's perfect for expanding your vocabulary organically, too.
I have a challenge for you before we move on.
Okay.
Pick one podcast from this list that truly sparks your interest.
All right.
Don't overthink it, just go with your gut feeling.
Got it.
Then commit to listening to at least one episode this week. Deal.
Deal. I love that challenge.
Awesome. Now, beyond just choosing the right podcast, they offer some bonus boosters to speed up your learning. Think of them as hacks or shortcuts to fluency.
Ooh, hacks and shortcuts. I like the sound of that.
Right. So they talk about things like immersing yourself in English as much as possible, practicing speaking regularly, tracking your progress, and being patient with yourself. What are your thoughts on those?
All of those are so important. I think they highlight this really crucial point. Language learning is a journey.
It is.
It's not just about one thing. It's about creating an environment where you're constantly engaging with the language in all sorts of ways.
Exactly. You know, I think it's worth diving a little deeper into that immersion aspect. What are some practical things our listener can do to weave more English into their daily life?
Well, one thing that I find surprisingly effective is simply changing your phone's language settings to English.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it might feel a little strange at first,
I can imagine.
but you'd be amazed at how quickly you adapt. And it's not just about being able to understand the menus and apps.
What else?
It's about all those little notifications and reminders and bits of text that you encounter throughout the day. It all adds up.
That's such a clever idea. I never thought of that.
It's a game changer. You're basically carrying around this little English immersion course in your pocket.
Exactly. You know, speaking of practical steps, they also introduced this really fun exercise that you can do to put all of this into practice. You up for it?
Oh, yeah, bring it on.
Okay, so it involves listening to a short clip from a podcast and then repeating what you hear to kind of get those sounds into your mouth.
Like a pronunciation exercise.
Exactly. And then you summarize the main points in your own words.
I like it. It's like a little workout for your listening and speaking skills.
Exactly. And the best part is you don't have to worry about being perfect, you know?
Yeah.
It's all about getting comfortable with the sounds of the language and just having fun along the way. What do you think?
I love that approach. I think sometimes people get so caught up in trying to be perfect that they forget to actually enjoy the process of learning.
So true. Mistakes are part of the journey, right?
They are.
Well, that wraps up part 1 of our deep dive into learning English with podcasts. We've covered so much ground already. We talked about active listening, using transcripts, all those podcast recommendations, and even those little hacks and shortcuts to boost your learning. What stands out to you the most so far?
Honestly, I'm really impressed with the emphasis on active engagement and the idea of turning everyday activities like using your phone into learning opportunities. It's all about making language learning a natural part of your life.
I completely agree. And remember, this is just the beginning. In part 2, we'll be back to dive even deeper into specific techniques for maximizing your learning with podcasts. Until then, start exploring those podcast recommendations and see what resonates with you. Happy listening.
Happy listening. Welcome back. You know what? We talked about active listening before the break. I think it's worth really unpacking that and seeing how it works.
Yeah, totally. It's easy to just say be an active listener, but actually doing it is another thing. So what are some specific techniques or things our listener can do to really make the most of their podcast time?
Well, one thing is really focusing on understanding what you're hearing, like comprehension.
Right.
It's not just about hearing the words. It's about getting the message and the nuance, the intention behind the words too.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
So that might mean paying attention to context or the speaker's tone of voice, even picking up on those nonverbal cues that add extra layers of meaning.
It's almost like you're a detective or something. You're piecing together all these clues to figure out the whole picture.
Yeah, exactly.
And I bet that whole process of figuring things out helps you internalize the grammar and vocabulary much better than just, memorizing lists of words.
Absolutely. You're learning organically.
Yeah.
In context, the way native speakers use the language naturally.
And that's where podcasts are so great. They give you all of that.
They do. It's really hard to find that kind of authentic language elsewhere.
So true. Okay, our source also mentions practicing speaking, even if it feels weird, like talking to yourself in the mirror. What do you think about that?
The mirror technique sounds a little strange, but it really does work. It helps build confidence and fluency. The key is to focus on, copying the pronunciation and intonation of the people you're listening to on the podcast. Think of it as fine-tuning your accent.
Oh, that's a good way to think about it. Speaking of pronunciation, I remember them mentioning this technique called shadowing. Can you explain what that is and how it can help?
Yeah, so shadowing is really cool. You listen to a little bit of a podcast, and then you try to repeat it almost at the same time as the speaker, trying to match their pace and rhythm and the way their voice goes up and down, like intonation.
It sounds like a fun challenge.
It is. It's like a workout for your tongue and your mouth.
I like it. Do you have any tips for making it more effective?
Yeah, definitely. Start with just small bits, maybe a sentence or two. Then, as you get more comfortable, you can make them longer. Don't be afraid to pause or rewind if you need to. The point isn't to go fast. It's to say the words correctly and get a feel for how the language flows.
That's good advice. So it's about quality over quantity.
Yeah,
Really focusing on those little details of how to say things right.
exactly.
Shifting gears a bit, they also talk about keeping track of your progress, like writing down new words and phrases that you come across in a journal. What do you think about that?
Oh, that's a great habit to get into. It not only helps you keep track of how many new words you're learning, but it also gives you a chance to, you know, go back and review those words and really make sure they stick in your memory.
It's like creating your own personal dictionary.
Yeah, exactly.
And I imagine that actually writing things down helps solidify them in your mind even more.
Absolutely. It's all about making those connections in your brain and making sure the words you learn become part of your, active vocabulary.
Words you can actually use.
Right, not just words you recognize, but words you can use confidently in conversations.
Hmm.
And speaking of repetition, the more you see a word or phrase, the more likely it is to become, just a natural part of your language.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've talked about some really specific learning strategies, but let's go back to picking the right podcast for a minute. Any advice on how to find the good ones in that huge world of podcasts?
Yeah, so one of the most important things to consider is what you're actually interested in.
Yeah, your passions.
Yeah, choose podcasts that cover things you genuinely find interesting. It could be science, history, comedy, whatever, anything that you like.
Yeah, that's so important. Learning shouldn't feel like a chore. It should be something you enjoy.
Exactly. And the awesome thing about podcasts is that there really is something for everyone out there. So explore different genres, find what you like and like. The more you enjoy listening, the more you'll learn.
Makes sense. Now, our source also said it's important to choose podcasts that are the right level for you, so you're not getting overwhelmed with stuff that's way too hard to understand.
Oh, definitely. If you're a beginner, you want to start with podcasts that are made for English language learners. Those usually have slower speech, clear explanations, and they often even have built-in vocabulary support so you don't feel lost.
Yeah, it's like going to the gym, right? You don't want to start with weights that are way too heavy. You got to choose the right one so you can challenge yourself without hurting yourself.
Perfect analogy. You got to find that sweet spot between being challenged and being able to actually understand what's going on. As you get better, you can move on to podcasts that are made for native speakers.
Okay, so let's talk about this idea of real life English again for a second. How do podcasts help us bridge the gap between the kind of English you learn in textbooks and the English that people actually speak in everyday conversations?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the best things about podcasts is they expose you to a much wider range of like accents and slang and idioms and stuff that you might not find in a textbook.
So it's like you're getting a crash course in all the little details of spoken English, all those quirky things that make it sound natural.
Exactly. And the more you hear these natural conversations, the more you'll start to pick up on those little things, those patterns, those unspoken rules of how English is actually spoken.
You might notice, for example, how native speakers use contractions all the time, or slang, or even those little filler words like, and like. Those things that add a kind of rhythm to spoken English.
Exactly. Those things aren't usually taught in textbooks, but they're essential if you want to sound more natural and fluent when you speak.
Yeah, it's like learning the secret code of everyday conversations.
I like that. It's like unlocking the secrets of how to really speak English like a native speaker.
And podcasts give you the key to that code.
In a fun way. It's not like studying boring grammar rules or anything.
It's like you're just listening to interesting conversations. Okay, I think this is all starting to make sense. Podcasts aren't just a convenient way to learn English. They're like a portal to a whole new understanding of the language and the culture it comes from.
Absolutely. And if you use the strategies we've talked about, active listening, shadowing, tracking your progress, picking the right podcasts, you can really make podcasts a powerful tool for learning English faster.
I'm convinced. Okay, so we've covered so much in this part. We've talked about active listening, pronunciation, choosing the right podcasts, and even bridging that gap between textbook English and real-life conversations.
We've also talked about how important it is to track your progress, make the most of those everyday learning opportunities, and most importantly, enjoy the process.
It should be fun. All right, in part 3, we're going to wrap up our conversation with some final thoughts, things to think about, and hopefully a little inspiration to keep you going on your English learning journey.
I'm excited for that.
All right, welcome back. This is the final part of our deep dive into learning English with podcasts. We've covered so much good stuff.
We have, haven't we?
I feel like my brain is full of tips and tricks.
Mine too. It's been great.
So before we wrap things up completely, let's do a quick recap of everything we've talked about.
Okay, sounds good.
So we started off by talking about, why podcasts are such a powerful tool for learning English.
Right, like how convenient they are and how they can really keep you engaged.
Exactly. And that amazing access they give you to authentic English, the way people actually speak it.
Yeah, real-life conversations.
And then we dove into the whole idea of active listening.
Right, not just having it on in the background, but really tuning in.
Using those transcripts to, reinforce what you're hearing.
And finding creative ways to practice speaking, even if it feels a little silly at first.
Like talking to yourself in the mirror.
Hey, whatever works.
And of course, who could forget those fantastic podcast recommendations tailored to different levels?
So many great options out there.
From ESL Pod for beginners to TED Talks Daily for the more advanced learners.
There's something for everyone.
Truly there is, but beyond the specific techniques and podcasts, I think there's something bigger here, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It's not just about memorizing vocabulary or grammar rules. It's something deeper.
It's about the journey, It's about celebrating those little wins along the way and remembering why you started learning English in the first place.
It's about opening up a whole new world of possibilities and connections.
Exactly. It's not about reaching some kind of imaginary finish line where you're suddenly perfectly fluent.
Because who even knows what that means?
Right. It's about constantly pushing yourself, trying new things, and enjoying those aha moments.
Those moments when you realize, hey, I understand this.
Yes. That's what makes it all worth it. And remember, every single step you take, even if it seems small, is moving you forward.
So true.
Whether it's listening to a 5-minute podcast on your way to work or trying out that shadowing technique we talked about, you're building those skills and those habits.
It all adds up.
It really does.
So wherever you are in your English learning journey, don't give up. Keep exploring, keep experimenting, and most importantly, keep that passion for language alive.
Yeah, find what sparks your interest and run with it.
And never underestimate the power of podcasts to help you along the way. They can be your teachers, your conversation partners, your window to a whole new world.
It's amazing what you can learn just by listening.
That's such a beautiful thought. Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive.
Oh, I'm sad to see it end.
Me too. But don't worry. We'll be back with more deep dives soon.
Always more to explore.
Exactly. So thank you for joining us on this incredible journey into learning English with podcasts. We hope you've learned a ton and feel inspired to keep going.
Go out there and make those podcasts your own.
Until next time, happy listening and happy learning, everyone.